Do we have a microphone?
Excellent, as always. Just two questions. One is, do you think that progestogens also have a blocking action? Did you ever do any sort of comparison, naloxone or progestogen? That's one question. And the other one is about how much is the hippocampus involved in all these learned sexual behaviors?
Now, the second one is actually really exciting because nobody's really ever looked at the hippocampus for sex because that's involved in place memory and episodic memory. And so is your sex life. I mean, if you can remember your first time, like most everybody can, or at least the first time that was really good, like most everybody can, that means you have a functional hippocampus because you can put yourself in that context. The role of the hippocampus in sexual behavior has been looked at sporadically historically with massive lesions, for example, where animals can't learn anything. So they can't remember anything. You put them into the context where the context, they get better and better and better in the context. Now they don't anymore. But that could just be a general memory dysfunction rather than a sexual disorder. Okay? That's about where that literature is. And that's stupid and disgusting because it should be further along. But the fact that it isn't means that I can get another grad student to start looking at it, right? And I have one who's coming from Ireland who's actually going to start to look at the role of the hippocampus in sexual behavior. To answer your first question, so progestogens are really interesting because we're priming our females with estrogen and progesterone in order to, we overreactimize them so they don't make babies, and in order to get them sexually responsive, we give them estrogen and progesterone. So I would say progestogen in and of itself know when you've got estradiol in the system, right? Because you're restoring what they would have when they go into heat. However, what about over and above that? Do you get feedback inhibition with high estrogen or high progesterone? And we don't know yet. So it's an important question because obviously, some women who take the pill lose their desire. And that's kind of a nasty little joke that we play on people, not knowing that that was going to happen. So if you think of negative feedback, you could potentially be knocking out reward mechanisms that are associated with it.
Any further question? I do have two questions for you. The first one is quite provocative. In some instances, are we able to induce partner preferences, which means that I do want you to have that partner instead of that one? Is it possible from the behavioral standpoint?
Well, yeah, I mean, you have a whole cultural issue with regard to that, and also your obedience to your parents. I mean, when does exotic become erotic? When do you get Romeo and Juliet? Well, you do when your parents say, I don't like that guy, I don't want you to marry him. You're mad in love with that guy, or whatever, and now all of a sudden it's naughty as well as highly arousing, which can make it even more rewarding, which means that that your parents are basically full of it, and you know what love really is, and your parents know what's best for you, so they think. So that discordance, I think, for some individuals, especially if they're good risk takers, becomes something that promotes the exotic becoming erotic. For others who are more obedient, well, okay, what my dad say might probably be true, and I'm just going to dump you and go after the other one. But you may end up with one that you're not really attracted to, but you do it by convenience or to fulfill some kind of cultural expectation that you should be marrying or being with this one. But you may in fact be bonded to another. And I would have ventured to guess, as Freud used to talk about the return of the repressed, that if you are, that's going to come out later on at some point and completely disrupt your life.
Thank you, Jim. And there is a question from Mario.
Thank you, Jim, for this very interesting lecture. You know that there is a huge debate on the peripheral administration of oxytocin and vasopressin and the activity in the brain. And you originally showed that this peptide have also some epigenetic effect in the brain. So how do you comment? You use a quite high dose, 5 micrograms. How do you comment they could reach the brain and the inner brain, actually?
That's an actually excellent point because even the oxytocin that people are using as a nasal spray, right? There's some evidence that it might be getting into the brain just by mass action because you're right here, the nasal mucosa is right there, and guess what's right above it? You've got a circumventricular organ called the OVLT, which does not have a blood-brain barrier, so it could be getting in near the medial preoptic area, or it could just by mass action be getting in to the brain. Certainly, there's some evidence that it is. There's a lot of evidence that it isn't. But imagine, let's say, for the sake of argument, it doesn't get in the brain at all. It just gets in the periphery because it gets in the bloodstream. Okay, great. So now what is it affecting? Well, it's affecting the spinal cord. It's affecting ejaculatory, the mechanism for orgasm in the spinal cord, which it disinhibits from serotonergic inhibition. It's also, you know, it's giving you a Shafiq reflex. So I don't have a uterus, so I can't have one. But imagine, you know, you get that kind of tickly sensation when you have an orgasm. You get these uterine contractions and the upsuck mechanism of the cervix. So imagine that happens with a peripheral administration of oxytocin. So you're more likely to have an orgasm with that individual. Now, does that mean you're going to bond to that individual? Not if dude gets up and leaves, or if you get up and leave. You're kind of, hookup culture is getting up and leaving. It's not staying together and doing what Stendhal said you should do to create the bond. When that happens, which for humans probably involves a lot of things other than, ooh, I just had good sex, although maybe for others it doesn't. But imagine that you feel comfortable with this person. You feel comfortable to reveal yourself, to, I don't know, have the funny face you have when you have an orgasm. Some people are worried about that, like, oh my God, do I make a funny face when I have an orgasm? So I'm going to suppress it because I don't know what. Well, imagine you're free to let go. Now, if oxytocin, kind of takes social distance and reduces it, that's part and parcel for what it might be doing in the brain. But peripherally, it's kind of helping prepare your body to have sex under those circumstances or to feel close to and comfortable with that individual. So it could be doing it in the brain, it could be doing it in the body and then the brain. Yeah.
Yes, thank you for this presentation. I was wondering, what is the usefulness of understanding animal behavior for human? But at the same time, I'm wondering if you use a so-called human model to understand animal behavior, or if we can use the so-called animal model to understand, and what is the interaction between both, of course, because there is.
So you can ask the question, why? Human sexual behavior is best studied in humans, obviously, but there's a lot we can't do. So for example, I can't take people's kids and say, okay, I'm going to give them their first sexual experience with, somebody from Ghana or somebody from Finland. But what parent is going to let you do that? What ethics review board is going to let you do that? It's hard to watch people have sex in their homes, like Master and Johnson did with their students back in the 60s. A, it was the 60s. B, no ethics review board will let you do that. So in humans, we're really dependent on, not actual observational study. We're dependent upon things like retrospective studies. So consequently, there's a lot we can't do in humans. So in order to understand, I can't take their brains out and look for Foss induction. You can look in the magnet, and that's kind of good, but you got a spatial resolution problem in the magnet that we don't have. We can study epigenetics in our animals. So one of the problems with humans, that's one problem. Another problem with people is that they lie. They tell you what they think you want to hear. We don't do this consciously, but if somebody says, well, was that good? Was that good? You go, yeah, that was really good. If somebody says, oh, did you like that film? I didn't really like that film. We respond to the experimenter, and that experimenter bias ends up biasing the sample. So it's a problem with people. The great thing about rats is they probably don't lie. The problem with rats is they don't talk. So we really need to look at their behavior, but we can control all of that. Imagine being able to control a shift between promiscuity and monogamy simply by taking a barrier out. That's insane control, right? But because we can do that, we can put it out there and say, okay, in a rat we do this. So what about a human? If this is the model stripped away from culture, then what influences would culture have on this model, or would socialization have on this model, right? So you can start to look at the model as a stripped away, stripped down version of what humans do, but the fact that animals are capable of learning about sex and expecting good sex and expecting bad sex and acting accordingly, I think that tells us that they're way more cognitive and thoughtful than we used to ever think.
Rosella.
Listen, are there any data in the literature suggesting that in the animal female model, sexual behavior, all those responses that you have studied so deeply, change before and after the experience of pregnancy and lactation? Because I believe this is crucial.
Oh, absolutely. So, you know, this is something that I have now a new graduate student who's studying, okay? So she's beginning to look at this, and I don't have any data yet, right? But I think it's going to become really interesting, because what you're doing by being pregnant is activating the same system. And the system I showed you for sexual learning is also the same system with the same players that gets activated when you see your baby, when that baby comes out, and especially when you sniff its head. There's something about baby heads that are just amazing, right? But so you bond to that baby. Now, obviously, you're not bonding to that baby sexually, you're bonding to that baby maternally or parentally, right? You bond to your lover, you bond to your cat and your dog. Paper in Science 2 weeks ago showing that the dog's oxytocin and your oxytocin tend to be matched when you really love your dog and your dog really loves you. Well, so how does that work? Well, that's exactly the same system, but now being directed by the hypothalamus a bit differently.
Yeah, and please, if you can study the vaginal delivery elective cesarean section in rats, we may see some differences, because we have women, they describe the experience of delivery, such as orgasm.
Yep, exactly. Well,
so this is great.
Clitoral stimulation,
exactly.
Everything you need for an orgasm, right? And it's orgasmic. It's beautiful. I mean, I can only wish I had those appendages.
Well, Johannes, we shall move, but do you have a very quick question? Yeah.
Would you say that the animal model for, would you say the animal equivalent for bonding is mate preference?
Well, for sexual bonding, you would have the mate preference, absolutely. Right, for sexual bonding. Now, for sexual pleasure, you can divorce that from bonding, right? I mean, we can make it so that we give them a different one every time, and if it's a smorgasbord, well, then you don't have to bond. You're just going to get really good sex with a whole bunch of different partners, right? And if that's what floats the boat, then that's what you do. But if you restrict it, and you could easily imagine cultures where that might happen, then you're restricting to features of the partner that become salient.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.